Hello everyone, my name is Chelsea James and this is my book report presentation on The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, written by Bruce Perry with the help of Maya Solovitz. And The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog is a compilation of traumatic experiences of children that Dr. Perry has worked with over his time as a psychiatrist. Dr. Perry discussed how trauma impacts the development of children's brains and how, despite prior beliefs, children are not naturally resilient. Perry also suggests that many children are misdiagnosed as having behavior disorders when in reality they are just experiencing the consequences that their trauma has had on their young brains. The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog is written by Dr. Bruce Perry. Bruce Perry is an American psychiatrist and currently works at the Child Trauma Academy in Houston, Texas. He is also an adjunct professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Feinberg School of Medicine in Chicago. Perry has served as a consultant and expert witness on many high-profile incidents involving traumatized children, including the Columbine High School massacre, the Oklahoma City bombing, the Waco siege, and the YFZ Ranch custody case. His research and work focuses on examining the long-term effects of trauma in children, adolescents, and adults, and it's been instrumental in describing how traumatic experiences in childhood changes the biology of the brain. In writing this book, Dr. Perry received help from Maya Solovitz. Maya is an award-winning author and journalist who covers addiction and neuroscience. She graduated cum laude from Brooklyn College. Maya uses her own recovery from heroin and cocaine addiction to explore how reframing addiction as a developmental disorder could revolutionize prevention, treatment, and policy. The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog explores the impact of trauma on children and the importance of understanding their experiences to foster healing. The book is based on the author's work as a child psychiatrist, where he encountered numerous children who had faced severe abuse, neglect, or trauma. Dr. Perry has recognized that in many of the child clients that he has encountered over the years, that the symptoms are recognized and the children are medicated to address the symptoms, but the trauma is never really fully addressed or linked to the behaviors. So Perry shares some of his most compelling case studies, including that of a boy named Justin, who was raised alongside dogs and exhibited behaviors reflecting his upbringing. The book illustrates how early experiences shape brain development and behavior. It emphasizes the need for nurturing relationships and therapeutic interventions to help traumatized children recover so that they can live thriving lives despite their adverse life experiences. Dr. Perry is quoted saying that resilient children are made, not born. The developing brain is most malleable and most sensitive to experiences, both good and bad, in early life. So Dr. Perry begins this book with a client that he calls Tina. Tina is a child who was sexually abused continuously over a 2-year period by her babysitter's son, who was 16 years old at the time. Tina was only 4 years old when the abuse started, and she has had no positive male figures in her life. Tina's behaviors were described as inattentive, impulsive, non-compliant, defiant, oppositional, and she has problems with her peers. Tina meets the diagnostic criteria for attention deficit disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. Like many other children who've experienced trauma at a young age, the diagnosis could have stopped there. The child could have been put on medication to address the DSM diagnosis of ADHD and ODD. However, Dr. Perry works to address the trauma behind the behavioral problems. With Tina's case and the other cases referenced in this book, it becomes evident for childhood trauma has a lasting negative impact on children that lasts even into adulthood if not addressed. So Leon is another example of how unhealed childhood trauma can impact you in adulthood. So Leon, like many other trauma victims, had been diagnosed with ADD and conduct disorder. His trauma went unresolved, and Leon developed sociopathic and antisocial behavior that resulted in Leon killing 2 young girls. Research now validates that the same chemical correlates that of sociopathy can be found in neurotransmitter systems that compose our stress response systems. In the story of Sandy, who was 3 when she witnessed her mother being raped and killed in her home before having her own throat slit, Dr. Perry describes how PTSD, or extended hyperarousal responses, can cause serious problems in life down the road, and many times will be diagnosed with the same form of attention or conduct disorder. Children will reenact traumatic events in play, drawings, and daily interactions. Another interesting insight that comes from the story of Dr. Perry titled Satanic Panic, where abused children were pulled from a satanic cult and put into Christian foster homes where they were forced to attend therapy to recall their traumas. Dr. Perry explains that forcing children to remember trauma that their brains have blocked or tried to forget can be damaging to the child and cause actually the reverse effect of what they were going for. So the individual needs vary, and no one should be forced to discuss or recall trauma that their mind has purposely blocked out. Let them talk about their trauma in their own time. With Amber, who was sexually molested by her mother's boyfriend, she found her own way of controlling the whole situation, which helped her relieve some of the constant fear that she had been living in. She first learned to mentally dissociate during the attacks, and she described going to a world where she was a raven, flying over the land and successfully fighting off any attackers. Amber also learned to control her reality by actually setting the environment for the attacks to happen. This put her in control of the attacks. She would give him alcohol and act promiscuous around him and just kind of set the scene for the sexual assault to take place. That way it was on her time, it was predictable, and she didn't have to live in this constant fear of never knowing when it was going to happen. The attacks eventually ended whenever the mom caught him in bed with her. However, she then developed PTSD and triggers. When the triggers would occur, she would dissociate, and this eventually landed her in the hospital. She also turned to self-harm by cutting, and Dr. Perry was finally able to kind of, get her out of this dark place that she had kind of retreated to by just talking, and she had a great support system, and she ended up healing over time. The information contained in The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog is relevant to work that involves interacting with children, adolescents, and families because research increasingly links the risk of depression to the number of uncontrollable stressful events that people experience during their childhood. PTSD and depression are often co-occurring disorders. Addressing the symptoms is not sufficient to healing, and therapy is needed to address the root causes of the symptoms. Children learn to react and survive according to the environment they have been exposed to. The children who were rescued from the Davidian compound are perfect examples of how children's development is impacted by environmental factors. For example, the children feared the world outside the compound. They possessed no sense of self-identity. They lacked basic decision-making skills. And research shows that rushing to debrief after a traumatic event is often intrusive, unwanted, and may actually cause more harm than good. The most effective interventions involve educating caregivers and positive interactions with the children. allowing them to open up in their own time. Justin, who had been raised as a dog, acted like a dog. He lacked social skills and was severely delayed cognitively, physically, socially, and emotionally. Even human interaction was foreign to Justin, who had been raised in a cage since he was 11 months old. Dr. Perry learned that easing him into human interaction and slowly introducing Justin to human activities like walking and talking worked best. This slow approach allowed Justin's brain to adjust to the changes so that he could learn and function as a human. Patterned, repetitive experience in a safe environment can have an enormous impact on brain development. And another thing that worked in Justin's favor was the fact that during his first year of life, he was with his grandmother who treated him very well. So if he wouldn't have had that interaction, the progress that Justin was able to make may not have been possible. Dr. Perry tells of how exposure to adverse childhood experiences can severely impact biological, social, cognitive, and emotional, and even spiritual and existential development. Repeated exposure to adverse childhood experiences and trauma tend to threaten core beliefs and assumptions, including their self-esteem, as well as their sense of lovability, vulnerability, and faith in family, friends, and even a higher power. Trauma survivors often face lifelong challenges in developing and maintaining trusting relationships, including building and utilizing healthy coping strategies and adjusting to school and eventually the workplace. These problems definitely follow people into adulthood, if not addressed. This book emphasizes the importance of looking beyond the presenting symptoms of children. The DSM-5 is a very useful diagnostic tool for mental health disorders. However, this book shows how impacts of trauma and abuse can mirror many symptoms of behavior disorders and mental health disorders. Dr. Perry proves time and time again in this book how treating the trauma rather than the symptoms can have a lasting impact on the child and reverse the behaviors that were originally diagnosed as other disorders. Dr. Perry also proves that with the right approach, children are highly resilient and brain damage caused by trauma and abuse can be reversed with the right care. In some of his cases, Dr. Perry used play therapy in his interactions with traumatized children, such as Tina. Play therapy is effective in various mental health concerns, including trauma, mood disorders, phobias, grief, and adjustment struggles and transitions. The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog provided useful information on the effects of trauma and abuse on children. I chose this book because of the work that I currently do. All of my clients have been victims of abuse, and many of them have experienced childhood abuse that has gone unaddressed. I chose this book to gain further knowledge into the lasting effects of adverse childhood experiences. This book was amazing, in my opinion, and the way that it is written makes it easy to put yourself in Dr. Perry's shoes so that you are visualizing and connecting the dots between his clients' behaviors and their trauma. In my early adult years, I spent time working with troubled youth at an emergency shelter for adolescents. And these children came from abused and often violent situations, and most of them were so medicated by the psychiatrist that Child Protective Services sent them to that many of them were barely functional. Looking back, I wonder how different those children's lives could have been if someone like Dr. Perry would have intervened and provided them with a treatment other than medication, if they would have been provided healing. I would highly encourage others to read this book, especially teachers, foster parents, and really any child care workers. Anybody who works with children on a daily basis, I think this would be a great book to read. So in conclusion, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog takes the reader on a tough journey through several childhood traumas, given detailed accounts of their experiences and the aftermath of those traumas and the healing journeys of each of these children who have lived through unimaginable experiences, and who were dismissed by many of the people who were put in place to protect them. Trauma and our responses to it are only understood in the context of human relationships. The most traumatic aspects of all tragedies and disasters are the shattering of human connections. Thank you. Again, I want to thank you for watching my presentation. Here are my references. Again, thank you.